understand tomorrow in downtown Toronto, Andrea Horvath is making a major announcement, and so we'll anxiously wait to see what's happening there. But so the government, the Liberal government, has prorogued the legislature, and we were explaining to some of our clients what that actually means. And there'll be a throne speech on Monday, and the throne speech generally is the government's opportunity to set out what the agenda is and the priorities are in the upcoming session, however abbreviated that session will be. And so that's March 19th, and then on March 28th, the government will be tabling the budget. And the finance minister announced last week, actually, that there's going to be a deficit in that budget. He was very clear, and that received lots of media coverage of up to, I think what he actually said was up to about less than 1% of the provincial GDP, and I think that GDP is about $795 billion, so the media said there's going to be an $8 billion deficit, which for some people makes it a bad budget, and I guess if the only measure you have of whether or not a budget is good or bad is if it's balanced or not. I had Adrian Batra of the Toronto Sun on here last week, and I'll repeat, I think I'm going to reserve judgment on the budget till I actually see what's in it before deciding whether it's a good budget or a bad budget. So we talked just before the break about some of the initiatives that the government has taken. The minimum wage. And being the Minister of Economic Development, you talk to the business communities all the time. So we went up from $11.40 an hour to $14 January 1st, and there's a legislated increase next January 1st, 2019, that it should go to $15. The PC leadership candidates were all unanimous in saying they'll leave it at 14. They wouldn't roll it back, but they would repeal the legislative requirement to raise it to 15 next year. And Doug Ford, and I will take some credit for this, I was here the first time I heard him say that he wouldn't have the second increase to minimum wage, but he would instead have anybody that earns up to $30,000 a year not pay any provincial income tax, and that was his way of helping people at the lower end of the income scale. So it sounds like both parties would acknowledge that more help is needed for people at the minimum wage rate, and maybe it's a different approach on how to go about it?
So there are a few things that I would say. I think it's interesting that Doug Ford has now started to pay attention and admit, I suppose implicitly, that Ontarians who are at the lower end of the income scale deserve government support. So again, that they can achieve what they need to achieve for a quality of life and survive in this province on a day-to-day basis, so that they don't have to make that stark choice between paying their rent and paying for groceries or supporting something that their child might need if that's the case. So I think it's interesting Doug Ford is now talking that way. But the challenge that I have with his approach on this is not about whether or not an income tax cut makes more sense than a minimum wage increase. And I'll come back to the minimum wage increase in just 1 second. What strikes me as really bizarre is that on the one hand, he's admitting that people at the lowest end of the scale need help, but on the other hand, he refuses to tell those people exactly which one of the public services that they depend upon he would cut, and how aggressively he would cut. And we talked about this earlier today. We know that in their plan, especially since they all promised to eliminate the carbon tax that used to be in their old platform, and by old platform I mean from a couple of months ago, by eliminating that carbon tax, the hole in their plan is now massive. We've said this earlier, we know that they need to fire at least 40,000 teachers, doctors, nurses, and others who provide core public services in communities around Ontario. That would have a catastrophic impact on every single Ontarian, but in particular, I would say it would have a particularly catastrophic impact on those people who are the most vulnerable. So it's fine to say like it's some kind of bumper sticker slogan, or it's some kind of tweet as opposed to a really well thought out policy. Well, I'm just going to do this. But at the end of the day, if you're going to wreak havoc in their lives, if you're going to put them even further into the shadows and on the margins, and you're not going to level with them about how you're going to do that, it just again speaks to me, and it suggests to me that he's really not ready for prime time. and he's not really genuinely serious about trying to help those people in their pursuit of more opportunity. On the minimum wage increase, I will say, and it's true, as Economic Development Minister, I've had the chance in communities across the province over the last couple of months to speak with business leaders, small, medium, and large size business leaders, and to hear about some of the challenges they are going through in this regard. There's a couple of things for us to remember and for your viewers to remember. Number one, we recognize that in particular our small business sector needs our support and needs our help, especially as they go through a transition that might cause them to have to rethink how they're doing business. And that's one of the reasons that a number of weeks ago we reduced the corporate income tax rate for small business from 4.5% down to 3.5% to help our small business sector remain as competitive as they have been over the last number of years. That's a conversation that's going to continue. My colleague Jeff Leal, who is responsible for the small business file, will continue to engage with the small business sector. We'll have that conversation. We'll make sure that we're in a spot that helps them thrive as they've thrived over the last number of years. As a government, we're also going to continue to invest very heavily in, I mentioned this earlier, the transportation infrastructure, other forms of critical infrastructure that we need for a strong economy. We're going to keep investing in our talent pool. So for example, we're increasing by 25% the number of STEM graduates that we're going to be producing in this province. Over the next few years, as a result of our decisions and our investments, Ontario will become the North American leader on a per capita basis in terms of producing STEM graduates. We're moving into AI and machine learning. We're actually going to be increasing the pipeline of those individuals who'll be graduating with master's degrees in AI. This is all about creating the kind of talent pool that will help us continue to lure investment to this province. So for example, my first day on the job as Economic Development Minister was the day that Amazon announced that Ontario, the Toronto region, Ontario made the short list of 20 potential venues or communities for their second global headquarters. That's a $5 billion potential investment that could create up to 50,000 new jobs. And the original list had 238 places across North America.
So we made the playoffs.
We made the playoffs.
That's good.
We made the playoffs.